This is the Shoulda Bet More podcast, presented by GoldBoys Network. Here's your host, Will Hill.
Welcome to the Shoulda Bet More podcast, presented by GoldBoys. Coming up on the show, Brad Thomas of NBC Sports will join us. We will talk college football, go over the slate this week, odds to win the national title, college football playoff implications. There are a lot of moving parts. Talked about it a little bit with Gil the other day, a little bit with Bear last week. And I wasn't in love with going to 12 teams. I just think you're adding more teams just to add more teams and have more revenue. I thought 4 was fine, but this creates a lot of interesting scenarios, a lot of moving parts in terms of who gets in, who gets left out, just different potential scenarios that makes it fun. So we'll talk to Brad about all of that. I will start here with the NFL. I'll actually do a little baseball too, because MLB finally, on November 11th, finally announced its awards finalists. The season ends September 29th. They finally announced the awards finalists. So I'll get to that and some offseason stuff here in a minute. But I'll start with the NFL. Just going back to the Monday night game quickly, the Dolphins win. And it's interesting. It just shows you, how many bad teams there are and this mess of an AFC towards the bottom. If the Dolphins had lost, they would be in line to have the 3rd pick in the draft if the season had ended now. But with a win, they are a game back in the loss column of the final spot, and they are plus 350 to make the playoffs. They do play the Raiders at home this week. The Dolphins host the Raiders, so a chance to get to 4-6 and sneak back in the mix. The only problem is, and at plus 350, I thought about them as and I think I mentioned it last week several times. They're better than these teams, a lot of these teams that are in the mix for the final spot, where it's the Colts or maybe even the Broncos. Maybe they're not better than Cincy, but the Jets were in the mix for that spot, and now Dolphins leapfrog the Jets. Who else am I missing in this spot? Bengals, Colts, Broncos, Jets. I think those are the teams. The problem with Miami, the schedule, they play a lot of games outdoors late in the year, and they don't travel well. They shrink in the cold. Now, as I'm looking at the schedule, home versus the Raiders, home versus the Patriots. So there's a path here for at least them to get back to hey, they're 5-6, and if they get some help, and it's possible that the final wild card is only 8-9 if you have a good tiebreaker scenario. But they play at Green Bay Thanksgiving night. That's a tough game. They host the Jets. Okay. They're at the Texans. They play the 49ers. Then their final 2 games of the season, December 29th and January 5th. It's going to be late in the season. It's going to be cold at Cleveland, at the Jets. I know those are bad teams, and you say, hey, you can't count that as a tough schedule because those are bad teams. But Miami, we've seen time and again that passing game with Tua, and just they're an indoor sort of dome kind of team where, even though they don't play in a dome, they're very sensitive to bad weather. I mean, we saw how they just fell apart in the conditions last year in Kansas City. Tua, the ball doesn't travel. He just doesn't have the arm strength when it's cold and it's windy. So the fact that they play at the Texans and they play the 49ers, probably maybe split with the Jets, and having to play at Green Bay, at New York, at Cleveland, I just don't know if there's enough meat on the bone there at plus 350. Now you're telling me 5-1, 6-1. Okay, with their talent, the rest of the AFC, those contenders are kind of watered down. Maybe you take a shot at them, but at plus 350, I just don't think it's enough. But they are at least in the mix, and hey, they can run off a couple in a row, and they win some of these games outdoors. They would be in the mix. I will say this: as far as the final spot for the AFC, be fun if either them or Cincy, I think, is the more fun scenario. I mean, I think Cincy for sure. But do you really want to see Bo Nix in the playoffs? I know they've played well defensively, but Bo Nix going to Buffalo, or they almost won at Kansas City, so you can't say, hey, they can't win at Kansas City. But you get the idea. Cincy in the mix with Burrow, with their offense, going to Baltimore or Buffalo or Kansas City would be more fun than I think a lot of these other teams. And throw Miami in that mix too. They would be at least have a chance, but I still think they do ultimately fall short. We have a good Thursday night game. We're up to 3.5 now, most spots. Philadelphia and Washington. Philadelphia is the home team. I like the Eagles here. Now, I don't love laying the 3.5, and you missed the 3s. I understand that, but I just think this is a tough spot for Jaden Daniels. I know he's played on the road in SEC games, so he's going to be used to, raucous environments. I get that, but at Philly, that's going to be a loud crowd. That's going to be a fired up, night crowd, primetime game, chance to really put your stamp on the division. Philly offense is humming now, and their defense has played a lot better. I just think this is a game where Philly kind of flexes their muscles. And look, Washington has not beaten a lot of good teams, but they did beat Arizona, and they have played respectably against Baltimore, and they could have beaten Pittsburgh. So they've not embarrassed themselves. They're a solid team. I just don't know that they're at the level of Philly, and the fact that it's in Philly, Philly's a little better. I think Philly wins this game by a touchdown, 10+ points. So I'm okay laying the 3.5 with Philly. I do think Philly wins this game. And I like this Eagles team. I know nobody likes the coach, and they had some weird losses and they had some weird moments early in the season where Sirianni was doing strange things against the Falcons, where he's throwing the ball to Barkley, and he tried to screw up the Saints game with the long field goal and all of that stuff and yelling at the fans. But this is a talented Philly team, and it seems like they are gelling right now. So I do like Philly. And again, I've made this point. When you have Barkley and Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and Goddard and Hurts, who's a borderline top 10-ish quarterback, and you got a pretty good defense, that's a hell of a team. That's a really good team. And I do think I do think Philly gets it done. I'm okay laying the 3.5 here. Quickly on the baseball, they have finally mercifully, after 6-7 weeks since the season ended, they finally not announced who won the awards, because that would be too much to ask, but they announced the finalists, which we know most of the finalists, and we've known who's going to win these awards forever. I mean, we know Judge is going to win the MVP in the AL. We know Ohtani's going to win it in the NL. I guess a few of these that are up in the air, and this is one that was interesting. Skeens did get a nomination. Skeens is a finalist. There are 3 finalists for National League Cy Young. Now, Skeens is not going to win the award, but it does maybe hint at the idea that voters respect him enough, and that'll give him the Rookie of the Year. I do ultimately think he wins Rookie of the Year, but I think that's, not even 55-45. That's like a 51-49 proposition. I think that's a coin flip. AL Rookie of the Year is a coin flip. NL Rookie of the Year is a coin flip. And AL Rookie of the Year is down to Wells from the Yankees, Heel from the Yankees, and Cowser from the Orioles. I don't think Wells is going to win. I think it's a coin flip between Heel and Cowser. Wells just did nothing the second half of the season. I know Femi Bevafe was on the show and talking about Wells when he was like 100-1 to win Rookie of the Year. I don't think Wells wins it. I think it's probably Heel. So I know these pitchers haven't really typically won Rookie of the Year, but I actually do think Heel wins and Skeens wins for the Rookies of the Year. And I think probably it's definitely going to be Skubal for the American League Cy Young. The other finalists are Lugo and Clase. As a closer, gets a nomination, even though he had a bad postseason. Obviously, postseason isn't part of it. Clase does get a nomination. I still think it's going to be Sale. Now, you never know with these markets, because with these awards, because the market's not reflective. I mean, it's a lot of guesswork in trying to think of, like, all right, how are these voters going to vote? Sale closed as a big favorite. Again, it's so long ago that this regular season ended. I can't even remember what Sale's number was at the end of the season, and he did miss some time towards the end. So maybe that opens the door a little bit for Wheeler, but I expect Sale to win. I'd be surprised if Wheeler won, but I wouldn't be shocked. But it's not going to be Skeens. It's going to be either Wheeler or Sale. I do think it'll be Sale. So excited to finally get these awards announced, which again is not even this week. It's next week, and it's not even all one day. It's like Monday is like the Rookie of the Year, then Tuesday something else. You have to wait till Thursday to find out the MVP, and we already know the MVP. It's Judge and Ohtani, and Soto and Witt got the other nominations. The National League nominations were Marte and Lindor, but my goodness, why they dragged this out, I have no idea. And speaking of dragging things out, Juan Soto is meeting with teams this week, Blue Jays and Red Sox and Yankees and Mets. I hope he goes back to the Yankees. I think he'll go back to the Yankees. I hope, at least, just for baseball standpoint, I hope this doesn't drag out, because you remember a few years ago, like Harper and Machado were free agents. That dragged all the way until like March, until spring training. Last year, you had Snell and Montgomery not signed until basically a week or two before the season started. It's just bad for baseball. That creates no buzz. In the NBA and NFL, the free agency all happens at once, all within a week or a few days. The fact that it's spread out, people just become apathetic. People, just lose interest. It drags too much, and then it slows down the minor signings, because everyone's kind of waiting to see where Soto goes and to set the market, and then everything kind of happens from there. I just hope this isn't a scenario where in the middle of February we're still trying to figure out where Soto goes. Hopefully it happens, sooner rather than later. I'm trying to think when Judge signed. I think that was that was in December sometime. So that's not too bad. Last year Yamamoto signed right around Christmas. I want to say that was in December. So maybe it'll happen the next month. I don't think it's happening in the next weeks. I still think it'll drag out. But look, he's going to take the most money. I mean, he was very honest about it. And it's tough, because we don't like when players, are dishonest, but sometimes it hurts to hear the truth. And that was a tough look right after the World Series. He's standing there with his Yankee hat, his Yankee shirt in front of the Yankee logo, saying, "Hey, I'll sign whoever gives me the most money," pretty much is what he said. There's no hometown discount. All 30 teams are in. I will go to whoever gives me the most money. And not an exact quote, but that was the idea of it, where it was very cold. It was very honest of, "Hey, I'm a free agent. If you want me, come get me." But I think the Yankees, just from a business standpoint, same way with Judge 2 years ago, they can't afford to lose Soto. You can't just run this team back. I mean, the team lost the World Series with Soto, and Soto was great for them. You can't run this back with Judge and say, hey, you know, come to our ballpark, spend a fortune on tickets, spend a fortune on beer and food and soda and parking and all this stuff. But we're not going to bring Soto back. We're gonna, I don't even know who they would get. Santander from the Orioles. There's just no replacing Soto, and they still have the most money. They don't always act like they have the most money, but they have the most money. They're worth the most money. They I think will ultimately get it done. Mets in the mix, Dodgers in the mix. Boy, if he goes to the Dodgers, like at some point, enough is enough. But the Blue Jays, it looks like they have a lot of money to spend. There's only a handful of teams. I don't buy that he's like going to the Red Sox, and you could basically, maybe the Giants. But again, the Giants have a lot of money. But is he going to want to go? First of all, it's not great weather. It's not a great hitting ballpark. Is he going to want to go play in San Francisco? I don't know. I do think there's a marketing aspect too of him staying in New York with the Yankees, like being with Judge and being a New York Yankee. That's worth some money too. So I think the Yankees will pony up and spend it. Sasaki, the right-handed pitcher from Japan, who's outstanding, he is going to be in the mix here. We'll see if he goes to the Dodgers. My goodness, some of these teams, you got to step up. And if he wants to play in LA, you can't really prevent that from happening. I mean, if these guys want to be on the West Coast, and he's got Ohtani there and he's got Yamamoto there, if he wants to be on the team with them, you can't really do anything. But boy, you got to break up the monopoly at some point if you're some of these other teams. And maybe that's a guy. If you're the Yankees, you could use another pitcher. Mets could use, but anyone could use somebody as good as Sasaki. So we'll see how much money he gets. We'll see how good he is. But he is the real deal from what I've seen. And I think he pitched in the World Baseball Classic. He's got some dominant stuff. So you wonder if he'd want to go to the Dodgers too, because just from a marketing standpoint for him, he'd be like third fiddle behind, Ohtani's the most famous, then Yamamoto, and then you're going to be like the third guy. You're just going to kind of blend in. Now, maybe he wants to blend in, but maybe he wants to, just kind of be his own star and build up his, his reputation, his own thing somewhere else. So does he want to blend in, or does he want to stand out and go somewhere else and, build up his marketability that way? It'll be interesting. So Sasaki, Soto, Burns is a free agent. Pete Alonso's a free agent. So middle of November, these moves will start to trickle in soon. We have the winter meetings pretty soon, and that's when things start to get going. But again, I wish wish these would all just kind of happen. Give us something to talk about. Not that we need more content during football, but it does, it does just leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth when it drags out. And it fails to create the buzz like in other sports. But let's turn the page. Let's talk some college football. We've got some interesting games this week. Georgia, Tennessee, college football rankings coming out Tuesday night as we're recording this. So we'll talk to Brad Thomas. That is next. This is the Shoulda Bet More podcast. All right, we are back. Shoulda Bet More podcast. You can catch him at NBC Sports, Bet US, GoldBoys. It is Brad Thomas. He is back. Brad, what's up, man? Down the stretch we come in college football. The season does go by fast. What's going on? How are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. It's been an insane college football season. To be honest, like I know I talked to a couple of more of the established pros out there early in the season. They said they were struggling to make their power rankings, especially with like all the transfers coming in, NIL making a big difference. I think we're finally able to get these power rankings a little more adjusted. But what's the biggest difference I've noticed, especially with teams like Oregon, right? Like the undefeated teams, the teams that are humming along, they're more likely to pull the plug earlier in the game to make sure they're healthy because there's more games in the schedule. So like teams like Oregon, they're good second half live bet under, or you bet the other team on the spread because they're going to pull the plug. The only teams not really doing that are teams who have like good teams who have question at quarterbacks, like Texas, right? When they had a chance to put Arch Manning in, they're not pulling the plug. They're going full cylinder because they need him to be ready should anything happen to Quinn Ewers in the playoffs.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've noticed that with Oregon too, where there's a little like load management, big picture. Hey, we know we just need to win, get out. We don't need style points. Let's just stay healthy and let's move on to the next one, especially with a soft schedule. Yep. You can kind of do that. We'll get to the games you like. We'll get to some playoff stuff. Let's just start here. I haven't talked a lot about the national title odds. Part of it's because I'm in Connecticut and they don't really post these for whatever reason, but you can find them offshore. You can find them in a lot of the states. Ohio State is 3-1 to win it all. They are the short shot. Oregon plus 375, Texas plus 450, Georgia plus 750. Your Alabama Crimson Tide are plus 800. Ole Miss is 10-1. Penn State and Notre Dame are 20-1. Tennessee's 22-1. Indiana's 25-1. I'll stop there. Miami's 33-1, then SMU 50-1. Any other team after that feels like a real long shot. Obviously, is there any value at current numbers here?
The only one would be Ole Miss.
Thought about that
I
one
think too, like their number was flirting around 13, so you didn't lose a ton after beating Georgia. But they needed to beat Georgia to even be considered for the college football playoffs. If you want to look at the teams that can win a national championship, I think that the list stops at maybe Ole Miss, maybe if you want to consider Alabama national championship contender, sure. I don't think Penn State's good enough, doesn't have enough good enough quarterback play, not coached well enough. Tennessee with Nico Amalavela, the offense is not good enough to compete at a high level. Defensive line is good. That's pretty much where they hang their hat. But when you have a team that's going to stack the box and try to stop Samson, it kind of stops there, right? Ole Miss is the really intriguing one, though, when it comes to value. There's a couple things that you need in college football, and I'm going to talk about what's important to me first before what's I think is the big picture important to me. The most important thing to me is good line play. Good on both sides of the ball, on the offense and defensive line. That's what Ole Miss has, something they haven't had in quite some time. You saw it against Georgia, really good offensive line and really good defensive line play. Number two, I really think you need an offense that can score at any moment. And what I mean by that is build drives and score from a winning or losing position. So a lot of these run first teams like a Tennessee, losing positions are more difficult for them because you're trusting in Nico Amalavela. But with Jackson Dart, Trey Harris, Caden Lee, Henry Parrish, there's a lot to like there. And then last and certainly not least, you need a well-coached team, right? And that's what Ole Miss presents with Lane Kiffin. I don't really want to bet Texas at that short price. I don't think Texas is as good as everyone thinks. They're loaded with a ton of talent, but they have issues of their own. Offensive line, I think they're one of the better offensive lines in the country, but they've showed issues against Georgia. Oregon and Ohio State are obviously the clear favorites. Oregon's humming along, haven't faced any real adversity. Their only hard game of the schedule, they play at home. And then the biggest adversity they face, they lose Tez Johnson for the season. He is their most important wide receiver. He's out with a collarbone. They say he might be back, but I just don't believe someone with a collarbone in that short of a period is going to come back. Maybe if he comes back for the national championship. And then Ohio State, issues on the offensive line, losing your left tackle is a big issue. How good is Will Howard in the clutch situations? We haven't had to see that yet. So it's just hard to get down within the short prices, although they are deserved favorites. I'd probably go with Ole Miss. I didn't talk about Alabama at all. Sure, you can bet Alabama, but are you going to trust Jalen Milroe to get you back in it from a losing position? That's where my worry is for Alabama. One of the best offensive lines they've had in quite some time. Defense has been really good. I'll give a knock on the defense. They are a cover one man team. That is their bread and butter. You're asking a young secondary, the youngest secondary in the Power Five, to go up against, let's say they get in a game against Ewers or get a Howard or Gabriel or Dart. They get picked apart, in my opinion. They need to have the game script going in their way. So probably Ole Miss is probably the most value.
Yeah, I was thinking, without looking at the odds, I was thinking, like, if anyone, remember before the year, it was Georgia, Ohio State versus the field. And I was like, man, I could see somebody else winning. Maybe there's value on Ole Miss, but then you look at the number 10-1. I don't know. I just wonder if you get more bang for your buck just betting them game by game and kind of rolling it over money line by money line.
Oh, you absolutely will, because I think against any of these teams, Ole Miss is the dog in every game except against Alabama.
Yeah, and then you have this weird thing where, all right, they've got 2 losses, and you got a bunch of possible teams in the SEC with 2 losses. You might be better off not making the SEC title game, because the SEC title game gives you a chance for a 3rd loss.
Yep.
And you have a possibility here where you have like a 5 or a 6-way tie with teams with 2 losses. So it gets super complicated, super convoluted here.
Yeah, that's actually the biggest problem with no divisions, right? Like, what do? You're without divisions. You have a bunch of teams that don't play each other. They don't play enough division conference games. You're going to probably, and I believe this is a real scenario, you're going to have 5 or 6 SEC teams with just 2 losses. Then are you going to punish a Alabama who has 4 ranked wins because they lose in the SEC championship? Are you going to punish Tennessee, who will then have the second, let's say they beat Georgia, they'll have the best 2 wins in college football because they lose in the SEC championship? Or do you punish Texas, who let's say they lose in the SEC championship, they'll have 2 losses. They haven't beat anybody.
Uh-huh.
It is really tough.
What do you think? What do you think their nightmare scenario is?
Their nightmare scenario is Alabama, Texas in the SEC championship. Alabama loses a close one. Tennessee beats Georgia.
Wow. Yeah, I don't. I'm curious your thoughts on that game. I don't like Tennessee this week. Just I don't know if the quarterback's healthy. I don't like that
Nope.
offense, and I don't like the
I
way
didn't like them
Georgia's
either
looked.
way, not coming off a loss first
Yeah.
and foremost before Georgia. And I think that, we saw the really bad offensive line play against Ole Miss. I think that Kirby Smart is just such a good coach he's not going to have bad offensive line play in back-to-back weeks. And then Tennessee probably should have lost that game against Alabama if we want to be pretty frank about it, right? Like they turned the ball over 3 times, and then Alabama decided to play Matador defense on 3rd down. If you look at like post game expected, it's like Tennessee didn't have a winning post game expectancy in that game because they had to convert on 3rd and long so many times just to win that game. I think offensively, you're more afraid of a Georgia than you are in Alabama.
Last sort of scenario that interests me. Indiana, let's just say they lose by like 10 to Ohio State. They have 1 loss. Don't have a lot of great wins, but they've dominated a lot of these teams. But their 1 loss is at Ohio State. Are they definitely in, or will the committee could the committee overlook them?
I think the committee could overlook them if there's 5 or 6 2-loss SEC teams. But the committee has said this, and they've been pretty adamant. They like the way Indiana is winning. Yes, they're not playing anybody, but they're winning convincingly. I do think it did hurt that they showed kind of like some weak spots against Michigan, but I think they're going to at least give them a look. But I don't know. A 1-loss Indiana team who hasn't beat a single ranked team, how do you take out a 2-loss SEC team that has ranked wins and they lose maybe 1 away game?
Yeah, it's fascinating, man. I wasn't in love with adding the 12 teams, but there's so much in terms of like content. There's so much just in terms of like moving parts and the interest. It does make it a lot of fun, and I'm excited for this last month. Before we get some of the bigger games, any of these weeknight games interest you? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, take it whatever direction you want to go.
Yeah, there was a couple that kind of caught my eye. I think that the Northern Illinois line's interesting. The Ohio line's interesting, but ultimately, like, these are not good football teams that you're laying over a touchdown for. And so I passed on those. But there is a line that absolutely interests me. And before the season, if you were to tell me that I'm taking ECU minus 13.5 against anybody, I would tell you you're insane. I'm taking ECU because 2 things had happened for this team that desperately needed to happen. Number 1, they need to make a change at coach. They make the change at coach. But number 2, I thought the most important thing is they needed to make a change at quarterback, right? They bring in Caden Hauser, and he has brought new life to this team. When I look at and just looking at like the game logs for Caden Hauser, right? Like 282 passing yards, 262 passing yards, 343 passing yards. And he's doing this at like, in those last 3 games, 68% completion percentage. He's thrown 13 touchdowns in 3 games. They beat Army 45-28. In that game, he threw 3 touchdowns, and he's throwing the ball deep downfield. That was their biggest issue. They're playing against a Tulsa team who's not very good. They don't do anything remarkably well except stop the run, right? They're 19th in defensive success rate against the run, but against the drop back, they're 110th. That's fine for ECU because they're 61st in the country in rush rate over expected, which means they throw the ball a fair amount. And that number has kind of gotten up a little higher now that Hauser's playing quarterback. He threw the ball 38 times against Army in the comeback effort, but in the 2 games where they dominated against Temple and against FAU, he only threw the ball 29 and 22 times, but they didn't have to throw the ball. Those were throwing the ball early, and I think that Tulsa's just in a lot of trouble here. Another metric that I think is really important, we'll go with 2 metrics that I think are really important in this game. Number 1, net points per drive. They're 120th in the country is Tulsa in net points per drive versus 67th in ECU. Another thing that's really important, and I probably could have included in the first segment as an important factor of football, that's special teams. Net field position, ECU 17th, Tulsa 102. That's a mixture of good special teams and getting off the field, getting the team off the field when you're on defense and not letting them get into plus territory.
How about the big one? Tennessee, Georgia. Georgia laying around 9.5. There's whispers. Imaliava is hurt. Got hurt last week. I don't know, his status. He hasn't been great, as you mentioned. I'd lean towards an under here just because I don't love either offense. I think both defenses are pretty good. And anything here for you, side total?
Yeah, I lean under on this one. But I just couldn't imagine taking Georgia as a almost 10-point favorite in this game because there's only been one instance where I said Georgia deserved the. No, I can't even say that. And there's been one game where Georgia deserved the cover that they got. When they covered against Clemson, they were average at best throughout the entire game. If you look at the EPA differences in that game, it was probably closer to maybe a 7-point victory as opposed to a 31-point victory, but they did win and cover in that game. When they played against Auburn gave them a run for their money early in that game. They end up covering late. Against Mississippi State scored 31 points, didn't cover in that game. Against the Gators, it took a quarterback getting injured for them to even remotely show some signs of life. And then they go and play Ole Miss, get beat up. And I'm not buying the bounce back narrative for Georgia. The only thing that's keeping me off of Tennessee, two things, Emil Avila being banged up or out, and number two, this game being in Athens at 7:30 at night.
Crowd will be well hydrated for this one.
Oh my God, yeah.
And look, Georgia, they got their 2 losses, but as long as they win out, as long as they take care of business, that 2-loss Georgia team is going to be fine in terms of of getting in. Any of these other games interest you? You can just kind of run them off in terms of what you like. I know you mentioned Colorado. Colorado's gotten bet here. They're up to 10.5. I don't know if you'd still lay it there, but I know that was one you mentioned. So what about that game and anything else you like on this board?
Wow, that's crazy. I bet Colorado under the 10.5. I bet them at 9.5. 10 is starting to get pushing it. 10.5 is you'd probably pass. Colorado's playing really good football, offensive line playing together. Early in the season, their offensive line struggled, but that's kind of to be expected when you have 5 guys on the offensive line coming from different schools. A lot of continuity is somewhere you're going to kind of struggle, but it looks like that's coming together. Shadur Sanders playing really well. Last week in their game, I thought was really remarkable how they were getting slapped in the mouth early and they came back. They kept their poise. Travis Hunter is playing elite defense on the outside. Any other games that I like? I had a couple here that I was kind of teasing around. I think my favorite bet of the weekend is going to be with Oregon. If you can still find some 13.5s, I know I saw it on FanDuel. Go ahead and bet that. I think this line's going to close closer to 15.5. They play against Wisconsin. Oregon's an interesting case in this game because of what I think the problem for Wisconsin's going to be. Wisconsin still plays at a pretty high pace, even with Tyler Van Dyke going down and Ches Malusi going down. That's the running back, or he left the program. They still play at a pretty high pace. Their offense is not all that good. 60th in EPA margin for their offense. Even if you look at net points per drive, only 80th, right? So they're playing fast. They probably should have scored more than they do, but they actually don't score that much per drive. They get a lot of drives, don't score a lot of much. Not a good recipe for an Oregon team that they're going to have a crap ton of possession, which means they're going to have a lot of opportunities to score. And defensively, I don't think Wisconsin's good enough. I think this plays right into the hands of of Oregon. Oregon also, surprisingly, as nice and as plentiful as Dylan Gabriel's numbers are, leads the country in completion percentage. They don't throw the ball nearly as much as you'd expect. It feels like they throw the ball. They're only 40th in rush rate expected. They run the ball. They want James to get a lot of touches. Well, the weakness of Wisconsin is the run game. We saw it happen time in and time again. This is a big test for Wisconsin. I think Oregon goes out and they roll.
If Colorado runs the table, wins the Big 12, Hunter is the Heisman, correct?
Maybe. Depends on what Ashton Denty does. Because you have to look at what Ashton Denty, his schedule, and I'm gonna look this up. I know he plays San Jose State this weekend, but his schedule is pretty favorable to put up massive numbers. Yeah. He plays San Jose State this weekend, bad run defense. Plays against Wyoming, bad run defense, and then he plays a power 4 school. Plays against a big name school in Oregon State, who has horrendous run defense. If he puts up like video game numbers, I'd probably have to give it to him. Travis Hunter's a good story, but I just don't think that I would give it to him. And I could be a little biased because I have Ginty at 50-1. I have Ginty at 35-1 and Ginty at 40-1.
I don't think they're going to give it to a Boise State running back. I just think the fact that Hunter is he's 2 top 5 players. He's a top 5 player at receiver. He's like
Which
a
is
top
crazy.
5 player at corner, and he's played like 250 more snaps than anyone else in the country. I don't. To me, if they win out, he's going to win. The question is, if they lose one game, can he still win? That's where it gets dicey. Then you have Gabriel, who could go undefeated, even though like his stats are not the stats of a Heisman. But you have quarterback of an undefeated team. That's just kind of that's how these voters work. I don't know.
What's interesting about this Colorado team is they're going to be favorites in every game they play for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
So sometimes, like I say, it's easier to be the hunter than the hunted.
Sure.
One of these teams is going to want to knock them off. Utah, Kansas, and Oklahoma State. I'm okay with giving it to Travis. I have Travis Hunter Heisman ticket too. It's just not worth a lick. Also, I want to say this, and I'm not pounding my chest for the homerness, right?
Milroe?
I was really someone put these stats up, and I was like, Milroe's not dead. Milroe's not dead at all. He has 6 interceptions, but look at him. He has 13 touchdowns through the air. 13 is a good number right now. He added another, what, 16 on the ground. That's 29 touchdowns responsible for. He's played big against ranked opponents. He's like, what, 5th in total QBR? Like, his numbers are insane. And lucky for him, he plays against Oklahoma, which, if he has a big game against Oklahoma, looks good because Oklahoma's defense is pretty good. He plays against Mercer. That's a stat pad game. And then he plays against Auburn, who I think that game could turn into a shootout.
Yeah, and a possible SEC title game where that's another, big stage where he could, show out against.
It's gonna be interesting. And I think after last year, I think this is the time where voters are no longer turning their ballots in early, because most voters turn in their ballots before the conference championship. And I think that it had voters, waited till after the conference championship, we probably would have seen Penix been the Heisman Trophy winner.
All right, Brad. Anything NFL you like this week? Good Thursday night game, Eagles, Washington.
The NFL has been pretty tough for me. And I saw, a couple guys, Scott Van Pelt, Amina, have been going off on Degenerate saying that's a pretty bad product for the NFL. And whether I agree with that or not, it did open my eyes to a couple of things here. It opened my eyes to the NFL. These big spreads, these big player props aren't being hit because defenses are playing better. And a lot of the quarterbacks aren't playing as well as we should. I'm probably going to bet the Detroit Lions -13 though. I pulled some stats I thought was pretty compelling of all the teams who have really poor or let's go really good pass defense. Most of them play cover 2. And Detroit doesn't fall in that. I think there's 14 teams that play at higher than a 48% cover 2. Detroit doesn't. Detroit does play a lot of zone and they play a lot of man, but primarily if they're going to play something that's going to be cover 1 or just a base zone. What is important to note about that is they have a good pass rush. All of the teams that are good teams that don't play a lot of cover 2 have good pass rush and play a lot of man, or they'll play like this, some kind of zone blitz scheme, something more exotic. That's what Detroit does well. Jacksonville bringing in Mac Jones, with Trevor Lawrence being banged up with the injury. They kind of got lucky to have covered against the Vikings. Vikings, 3 red zone turnovers, interceptions thrown. The Vikings couldn't pressure the quarterback like I thought they were going to. We have to remember the Jacksonville Jaguars offensive line is really banged up. Detroit Lions, I like them a lot. I think Detroit Lions can win this by like 20+. I'd probably play the alt line.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest spread of the year because we have not had a lot of double-digit spreads. There's not a lot of, even though there's a lot of bad teams, there's not a lot of great teams.
Yep.
And you haven't seen a ton of even double digits. So 13, man, they're making you pay for it. But I don't want any part of Jacksonville necessarily. I mean, that was ugly last week.
Well,
Brad,
what's pretty sad is nowadays you don't get the good alt line prices. The books used to give you great alt line prices. Now, like if you're gonna get an alt line, let's say it's a 13-point favorite and you play 21, it's gonna be +160. But
not worth it.
If you buy but think about it from the other side. If you buy 2.5 points, you're already taking 30 cents.
Sure.
So why are they gouging you for 50 cents? Like they should be. I feel it used to be more comparable, but books are in the business of making money, not giving handouts.
Yeah, and a lot of the markets. I mean, we used to talk about first touchdown score. I mean, that's just a market where it's.
Touchdown score Malik Washington was 50-1.
I saw him 80, 90-1 at some books.
Okay, he closed at 50-1 on Hard Rock. Will, I'll tell you this. I love gambling. I'm not gonna pretend. I love gambling. There's no way in hell, and I'm taking a 50-1 Malik Washington first touchdown bet. Not even on a free bet.
Right. It's become hard too, because the short shots are too short, and then you end up like looking way down the board. They hit once in a while, but you just have to get lucky and figure out the right one. It used to be, it's just that the numbers are not as good as they used to be.
Yeah.
Brad, you're the man. Let everyone know where they can find you. Appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, you can find me on X at Mr. Brad Thomas. I also every Thursday, 6 a.m., I host the NBC Sports College Football Show. All you have to do is go onto your favorite podcast and type in Bet the Edge, or go onto YouTube and type in Bet the Edge. It's every Thursday morning.
Brad, appreciate the time, man. Hopefully we'll do this again soon. Good luck. Good luck to your Bama Crimson Tide there.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man.
All right, that'll do it. Thank you to Brad Thomas. Rate, review, subscribe. Be back Friday. Talk to you then.